Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Major updates today on the future of Formula 1, not just what the cars are looking like for 2026, but also what the driver pairings might be in the relatively near future after Lando Norris's victory over Max Verstappen, also Oscar Piastri in this year's World Drivers' Championship. Big questions raised as to whether behind the scenes at McLaren it's really all as sunshine and rainbows as Zach Brown and Andrea Stella would have us believe. Some rumours emerging that if Piastri was to leave that team over the next couple of years, which Mark Webber might be in favour of doing, who would their replacement driver be, and could it be Charles Leclerc? Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Again, apologies for the late video. It's been a long day here in Poland. Got a lot to talk about. Firstly, a few things on this FIA prize-giving gala, because we roasted Mohammed and Sulayem to some extent yesterday, but after everything transpired last night, I think it's worth giving it an extra little bit as well. You see, he's also got some little heels on his shoes here, so we can just look that little bit taller next to Lando Norris. Now, look, he is the president of the FIA, so the drivers and the teams have to treat him a certain way. It's kind of his party at the end of the day. But man, this guy, he is way more of a talking point than he should be, right? The president of the FIA should really be a non-factor, right? Like, they are the governing body. But no, absolutely not. Ben Sulayem is everywhere for, for good and for bad. I mean, certainly you could debate that perspective. Max Verstappen, he couldn't make it. He gave a speech to camera congratulating Lando, congratulating Ben Sulayem as well on his re-election as president. So Max, too unwell to make it. His doctor said that he shouldn't fly and all that. But it can't be that unwell, because I don't know that he did pull out of that sim racing thing, but this is him today in Monaco. It looks all right, so I don't know. Obviously, it wouldn't. If Max had won the championship, he probably would have found a way to go to the prize-giving gala, let's be honest. But he didn't, and yeah, he looks maybe a touch under the weather, but maybe he could have made it if he really wanted to. Anyway, the other talking point, I guess, was this. Some of these Ben Sulayem moments were hilarious, but also simultaneously kind of concerning. I mean, this fella tries to give the trophy to Lando, and Ben Sulayem's like, no. That's my job, sunshine. Look at him. He just yanks the trophy and takes it for himself. I mean, it's actually so funny. I mean, look at him. Look how he grabs it with both hands here and he just takes it over so he can give it to Lando. Look at the way that Lando's looking at him, man. It just must be such a strange dynamic. Like, all of those guys standing behind watching these dynamics, they must have their thoughts on Ben Sulayem. And this is the one that everyone's been talking about, is what he's doing to his hair. I just God, imagine this was... First of all, I think Lando has got to... I don't know, man. I know he's the president of the FIA, but I can't imagine, Max or, imagine Schumacher or Hamilton or something, allowing this. This is no way, right? I mean, what's he doing? He's playing with his hair for some reason. He slaps him on the back of the head, and then he goes... Oscar's these guys are trying to laugh or something, and then he does it again. He goes for it again. I don't know, man. What is this clown doing? Genuinely... This is your World Drivers' Champion. This is the man who should be the most respected in the whole building. And is he not just, horribly disrespecting him? What is this, right? What am I watching here? In addition, I mean, and also it's his party. So Lando, as much as I can say, Lando shouldn't have let him do that or whatever, but, what do you do? Square up on the main stage? You can't really do that, right? So... on some level, Lando just has to kind of take it, but it's all very confusing why this guy is not only so front and center. Okay, Ben Sulayem, get in the pictures, right? Put your head in, get in the pictures. We've seen that before, but to do stuff like what he's up to yesterday, yeah, couldn't really believe my eyes at that one. Lando also swore and said, we made a fair few mistakes, he said in his own words. Maybe he's going to get an FIA fine for that one. Andrea Stella said, pretty interesting, we have competed with equality and with impartiality. So, look, whether Oscar Piastri had any thoughts on that running through his head that he didn't necessarily want to say in the moment, that is a very good question. Zach Brown, of course, watching him while he says it. Look, there's always going to be questions this year on whether those McLaren drivers were treated fairly. That is the advantage of having a straight-up number one, number two dynamic, is you don't have to worry about those accusations because it's obvious. Red Bull never explicitly say it, right? Red Bull will never tell the media Max is our number one in exactly those words, but, I mean, everyone knows what it is, and Helmut Marko will say it in those explicit terms. The other teams won't necessarily do that, but it's pretty obvious at most teams what their preference would be, especially in a fight for a driver's championship. McLaren have tried to operate in a different way, but it's incredibly difficult to treat your drivers equally if you want to. That's why they've struggled, because let's say Hungary, Lando goes along for the one stop, Oscar goes for the two stop, right? Many would say, oh, well, Lando got treated, or let's say Oscar got treated unfairly in that moment. But really, it's like the way that Mercedes would tend to do it is, look, the drivers are not necessarily going to get the same strategy. They're going to get the same opportunity on the track. The lead driver is going to have priority to do what they want to do. If the different mini teams within the team, they want to split strategies, they will be free to do so. That's what Lando and his side of the garage decided to do that day in Budapest, and it worked out spectacularly well. And if McLaren's stance wasn't, oh, we definitely have equality and no imbalance at all between the drivers, then it wouldn't be an issue, right? But because they have had that stance, then people are looking at it saying, are we so sure that that is always the case? So, look, Oscar, it's always a big dynamic here, because Oscar's looking at that trophy thinking, that might have been my only chance to get it. I'm sure maybe he's not thinking that, but like from a fan perspective, you got to recognize that chances to win World Championship trophies do not necessarily come along very often, and Oscar didn't win it this year, largely due to his own, let's say, lack of performance in some critical rounds. But some will link that to McLaren's internal dynamics, or whatever you want to say. The reality is, when you have images like this, Oscar can say nice things and be friendly to the cameras and all of that. Doesn't mean he's going to be very happy with how things are. I can guarantee you that Mark Webber, his manager, is not especially happy with how things are, because he probably feels some parallels between what's happened to Piastri this season and what happened to himself at Red Bull back in the day when Sebastian Vettel had joined the team. These are the gentlemen and the ladies in the private jet on their way back from Uzbekistan with both trophies in hand. So congratulations to McLaren. They got the job done. They got the job done just about, but they did get the job done with both championships. The other FIA update is this, which again, I do wonder what the teams are getting in return for all that they are giving up in this new Concord agreement, because by all accounts, the teams need to pay more money to the FIA now. They have to have more concessions to the FIA with this new agreement. What do they get in return? The FIA say they will spend that additional money on, effectively, they didn't say it explicitly, but permanent stewarding and stuff like that. There will be some things that I'm sure the teams get in return. But every car this year must bear the FIA logo with a height of at least 7.5 or 7.5 centimeters, which is reasonably chunky, let's be honest. According to a new set of regs, the logo must be positioned on the top of the nose or on either side of the nose and be visible from the side of the car. So, probably they will do it on the side so the teams can put their logo still on the top of the nose. But I think that is quite the thing to mandate from the FIA side. So not many great updates coming out of that yesterday. But let's talk about 2026. Just one quick thing before we get there. Reportedly, Helmut Marko is going to get a €10 million payout for leaving the team. So again, this is one of the additional things just to say this was not Marko just deciding to leave, right? Like, as much as they may want to position it in that way, Marko made his statement that kind of implied it, but like, if Marko's going to get paid €10 million, he'll say whatever he wants in a statement, right, in terms of defending the team or whatever. But the point is, his contract ran until the end of next year. They're getting rid of him early. Maybe some of those reasons were his own, but it definitely appears that Red Bull are trying to get rid of basically the entire old guard. But they also want to keep Max, which is the challenge, right? Because if you get rid of all of Max's entourage to a degree, but also those that were there in that Red Bull dynasty that we kind of lived through over the last few years, difficult to imagine Max stays for too much longer. But that is relevant to the discussion we're about to have on 2027 driver lineup especially. Marko's going to get a fair payday. Shouldn't be a big surprise. And again, Marko's a controversial character, right? That can be, we don't need to say that again. But he's also an incredibly influential figure in the history of Formula 1. Now look, yes, Marko did have the advantage as Dietrich Manishiz's right-hand man to make whatever decisions effectively he wanted. And because they had two teams, they were able to offer Sebastian Vettel, they were able to offer Max Verstappen that opportunity where other teams were not necessarily able to. But still, without Marko, Red Bull's success with the Vettel era and the Verstappen era likely would not have unfolded, certainly not in the way that it has. So think what you want about Marko. He's an important character in the history of Formula 1 for multiple reasons, and the team, look, you might wonder, why is he getting paid so much? Is it like that's his next year's salary that they've got to pay him instead of him actually working there? And then you might say, well, damn, it's a lot of money to pay the guy for a year. but I think my point is that he's probably getting paid good money for at least in part good reasons, but maybe his judgment isn't quite what it used to be. That would be the argument from some in charge at Red Bull. Let's talk 2026. Just one quick thing. We will discuss this in more detail as time goes on, but these are the wings in 2026, and they have multiple modes. So, it's just like, it's going to be very complicated, this, but we not just have a full opening of the active aero, we have a partial opening where only the front wing opens and the rear wing is closed, which is going to affect the aero balance to a degree, or there's wings totally closed, and what they will be using here is dependent on race control, what they decide will be allowed in the moment. Man, things are going to get real complicated, and this could be good or it could be bad. In some respect, it's probably going to be both. As I say, we'll probably discuss more on that in the coming days. But let's talk about 2026, 7, and what's going to happen over the next couple of years, because things are going to get crazy at the start of next year. It's becoming very clear from qualifying in Melbourne where the pecking order lies, and over the first 6 or 7 Grand Prix, we are going to find out why these drivers might want to leave in terms of where their competitiveness stands. Now, Hamilton at Ferrari, it all started rather well. The aura farming photo shoots before the season began, the sprint race victory in China. Since then, it was a challenging season to say the very least for Ferrari full stop, but also for Hamilton. Now for 2026, apparently they're relatively satisfied. There were some concerns a little while ago over reliability questions on the new engine. Now that will be the case for other teams too, but apparently Ferrari have confidence that they have good power, they have good hybrid energy recovery. So look, we're going to see where the engines line up. It's not Ferrari considered to be on the same level quite as Mercedes, but who really knows what's going to happen when we get to the season itself. But the team believes that they're meeting the targets, they're in an okay position. Maybe Ferrari can be competitive next year. I think, they should be competitive. The question is, can they be competitive enough? And if they can't, that is where the questions are raised about this man, Charles Leclerc. If he gets another 19 podiums, by the way, before becoming a champion, which is actually very likely, right? Like, if he even does become a champion, but just to say, if Leclerc was to become champion, let's say in 2027, then it's quite likely that on the road to becoming the champion, he may well receive, could be up to 19 podiums. There's only 24 races, right? So that's a very plausible possibility, and especially if he was to become champion in 2 or 3 years, then almost certainly he will become the driver with the most podiums in history to never have won a world championship title. If he wants to prevent that from happening, or if it does happen, then it's fine because he wins all 24 races. So, yeah, he gets the record for 5 rounds before then being crowned the champion. I guess in that circumstance, he's be crowned champion far earlier than Abu Dhabi. But you get my point. He may have to consider changing teams. And this is the big debate at the moment. If Ferrari don't deliver in those first few Grand Prix next year, Leclerc has made it clear, and his team have made it clear, he will be looking for the exit door, which feels remarkable to say, but you can't blame him, right? This is a prime Charles Leclerc. I mean, we've seen some of the driver rankings of the season come along. Some are putting Leclerc as high as seconds. Some are putting him thirds. I think he's probably 4th at the absolute worst in terms of drivers of the season. Maybe you could argue 5th, but he's certainly in that ballpark. And last year, I think, again, outside of Max, he was the best driver on the grid. So this is a prime Charles Leclerc. And he said to the media after Abu Dhabi, 2026 is now or never for Ferrari. And that's pretty clear because he says, look, if they don't deliver in 26, I am out of here. And the article suggested as well, I think it was from the guys at Auto Racer, that there are 3 teams interested in his services. We guessed who that might be. The obvious guess, of course, would be Aston Martin. They're interested in any top driver they can get their hands on because they will need them in the coming years, and they are building everything around that to try and make that possible. The other question, I guess, would be about Mercedes. They're building a strong project, but we understand that Toto would for sure be looking to get Max if he was available. So if Toto would consider dropping George or Kimi for Max, then would he consider dropping George or Kimi for Charles? It's a question. I think it's tough to judge who's better between George Russell and Charles Leclerc. I would be utterly fascinated to see a title dynamic between those two, or even see those two in the same team. I don't think it's especially likely it happens, but it's not completely out of the realms of possibility. Charles Leclerc says it's now or never, but the big rumour that was emerging today is that potentially McLaren could be interested as well. So of the top contenders, which teams, if there are 3 interested, would be interested in Charles Leclerc? And I'm counting, Cadillac out of this as a pretty unrealistic option. So, look, could it be Red Bull? Unlikely. Look, in the eventuality where Max leaves, then sure, I guess. But the issue is that for Leclerc, if Max were to leave Red Bull, then what does that say about where Red Bull are and the way that Max perceives their future? Why would you go there in such a circumstance, especially to leave Ferrari to do so? I just don't think you would. So McLaren get more interesting, however, because as I've said numerous times, I have a hard time for seeing Piastri-Norris surviving as a duo for the next 5 years. That's certainly not going to happen. I can't see a world where that happens. Even for the next 2 years, because they've been teammates now for a little bit of time, Lando and Oscar. Yes, they may have a good relationship off the track, but especially if they continue to be a competitive force next season, in addition to what Oscar feels was some level of injustice. Whether you believe it was or not, Oscar went on record and said that the swap in Monza affected him to some degree going into Baku. It was on his minds. That kind of, perceived injustice, or injustice straight up, depending on your opinion. Now, Mark Webber, as I say, will definitely have his thoughts on such an idea. Lando is the golden boy at McLaren, especially so now that he's won. Maybe the pressure's off his back to a degree now with Lando. Maybe he's even better for the next couple of seasons and continues to be very competitive. In such an eventuality, Piastri could and maybe should look for alternatives. Now, where would those alternatives be? Ferrari? I mean, that's not impossible. Red Bull, also not impossible. That we think there has been some interest in Red Bull in Piastri from Red Bull before. There was a rumour a little while ago that if Max were to leave, they would look to get Piastri in instead. So that's something to think about. Of course, Mark Webber has those relations, something worth keeping in mind. But what about Charles Leclerc to McLaren? So this is the article here. It's from F1oversteered.com that went out today, or actually yesterday, and they're talking about this rumour of Piastri's salary and all this type of stuff, but it appears that they are particularly interested. Actually, so there's other reporting says that Piastri is frustrated at McLaren. He thinks the team showed a growing preference to Norris. McLaren are reviewing their options, and apparently they're particularly interested in Ferrari driver Charles Leclerc, but they'll have to rival Aston Martin for his signature, etc., etc. So this is very interesting. And what would that look like, right? What would a dynamic look like of a Charles Leclerc to McLaren? Because, look, McLaren and their papaya rules, there is an argument that McLaren should not go for Charles Leclerc and should instead say, Lando's our number one, and we are going to commit to that option if Piastri were to leave. If you bring in Charles Leclerc, all of a sudden you've got a real tasty dynamic on your hands again. Do I think Leclerc is better than Piastri? Right now, yes. I think, in future, I think Piastri still has a prime yet to be reached, but right now I'm taking Leclerc over Piastri. Right now I'm taking Leclerc over Lando, to be perfectly honest, right? So that, I think, is what's real interesting, is if Leclerc was to join McLaren, then it's Lando's team. So what does that look like? I don't know. It's one of those decisions, if they were to do that, because when they signed Piastri, it's like, okay, he's a rookie, Lando's the established guy. It's one of those dynamics which could develop into being a little bit fierce, kind of like George and Kimi could get pretty spicy in the next couple of years if that stays Mercedes lineup. But it's a sensible move for McLaren. But the move of bringing in Charles Leclerc alongside Lando Norris, theoretically, that's a far more questionable decision to make, unless McLaren are very confident that their papaya rules and their ability to manage two number one drivers, as it were, is not going to be impacted too much. So that's your talking points of the day. Very much interested your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. My swimming competition finishes tomorrow. Then I'm getting the train to Warsaw. So possibly tomorrow evening I'll do a video. We'll see how it goes, how much there is to talk about. But yes, hope you've enjoyed the coverage, regardless that the time might be a little bit later than normal. But yeah, thanks for watching as always. Thanks for all the support on Spotify. If you're listening over there, watching over there, you haven't followed yet, I'd appreciate that. And yeah, take care. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.